6:37 a.m. Concourse A, Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Karen skillfully maneuvered the metal cart through the hurried crowd squeezing their way through Concourse A. The loudspeaker crackled constantly, blending boarding announcements with the sounds of rolling suitcases, crying children, and the breathless urgency of people racing against time. She wore a light blue blouse, carefully ironed the night before, paired with dark jeans and sneakers. Beside her walked a 6-year-old girl, tightly gripping the hem of her mother's shirt. "May, do you remember what I told you?" Karen bent down to ask as they stopped near the security checkpoint. The little girl nodded, eyes gleaming. "Yes, I don't run around, I stay quiet, and I stay with you." Karen smiled and gently brushed a hand through May's soft, dark curls. "Good girl, today's important for Mommy. You're the smartest little girl I know." Few people knew that behind the scenes of the busiest airport in America, there existed a tightly controlled internal hiring system for ground crews, technicians, and frontline management. Today was the final interview for the role of Assistant Terminal Services Coordinator, a position that could give Karen her long-awaited re-entry into aviation after nearly 7 years freelancing from home, raising May, juggling bills, and budgeting down to the cent. She had arrived 20 minutes early, not from anxiety, but because failure wasn't something she could afford. In her pocket, her phone still buzzed with unread messages from the Housing Debt Recovery Office. Final notice, the 15th. That left exactly 10 days. "Good morning. I'm Julian, Airstar's recruitment assistant. We had a 7 a.m. interview scheduled, correct?" The young man's voice was warm, confident. Karen turned, offering a polite smile. "Yes, thank you. I'm Karen." Julian's eyes flicked to May, who was quietly coloring in a small cartoon book. "Your daughter?" "Yes, I apologize for bringing her. Her babysitter was in a car accident this morning. I didn't want to miss the interview." Julian hesitated. "Normally, we don't recommend bringing children to operational coordination interviews, but I'll see what I can do. Will she stay here quietly?" Karen nodded firmly. "I promise." 7:04 a.m., second floor meeting room, Airport Operations Wing. The meeting room was soundproof and enclosed in glass, overlooking Airstar's check-in area. Employees in uniform lined up neatly, guiding early passengers. Karen steadied herself as Julian introduced her to 2 members of the panel, a silver-haired woman named Beth and a sharp-eyed man named Howard. "Miss Clark." "Sorry, Karen," Beth began, smiling thinly. "I see from your file that you previously worked as a digital content manager for a media company, then spent 7 years freelancing. Could you elaborate on why you stepped away from the office workforce for so long?" Karen drew a deep breath. She'd rehearsed this answer in her mind hundreds of times. "I became a single mother shortly after my daughter was born," she said honestly. "I chose emotional stability and quality time with her over income. Now that she's in 1st grade, I'm ready to return to the professional environment. Aviation is where I want to grow long term." Howard said nothing, just scribbled something onto his notes. Karen felt like the words on her resume were trembling in sync with her own heartbeat. A soft knock broke the silence. A female ground agent poked her head in, face pale. "Sorry to interrupt, there's an issue. Karen's daughter ran off from the waiting area. We're looking for her." Karen shot to her feet. "May? Where is she?" She dashed into the hallway, heart pounding. Her mind spiraled. Why would May leave her seat? What happened? Then she saw her. May was standing next to a middle-aged man in a charcoal gray suit. His face was stern, his hand holding a black leather briefcase. He had knelt down to May's level, visibly stunned. "You look like the man in Mommy's picture," May whispered, voice trembling. "Are you my daddy?" Karen froze. The man before May was none other than Mason Hale, CEO of the Airstar Airport Infrastructure Network. Karen had never imagined she would see him again, not at the airport, not in a life where a single mother like her struggled to keep the lights on. Mason slowly turned his head. His eyes locked with Karen's. A second passed, but it stretched like eternity. Recognition struck. "Karen," he said, "what is this?" And in that moment, Karen knew. Nothing about her life, her job, her identity, the version of the past she thought she'd sealed away, would ever be the same. Not after May had looked the most powerful man in the airport straight in the eye and called him Daddy. Karen stood silently in the conference room, her eyes meeting Mason's, the man her daughter had just called dad. The air grew heavy and all eyes turned toward them. Mason, the airport's chief executive officer, looked at Karen with a mix of surprise and suspicion. He had never seen her before, but the word "dad" from the little girl made it impossible not to question everything. "Miss Karen," Mason spoke, his voice deep and serious, "I think we need to have a private conversation." Karen nodded, trying to remain calm. She knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever, and perhaps it was time to face the past. They left the conference room, leaving curious glances behind. Karen held May's hand tightly, her heart filled with anxiety about what was to come. In Mason's private office, Karen began to tell her story. "You and I had a brief relationship more than 6 years ago. I didn't contact you afterward because I didn't want to disrupt your life. But when May was born, I realized she had the right to know who her father is." Mason listened intently, his face unreadable. He requested a DNA test to confirm the truth. Karen agreed, knowing that the truth would speak for itself. A week later, the results confirmed it. Mason was May's biological father. Mason, a man who had believed he had no children, now had to face a new reality. He began to reflect on his responsibilities and how he might make up for the years he had missed. Karen, though still anxious, hoped that May would now have the chance to know and bond with her real father. Karen stood frozen, barely feeling the cold, white fluorescent lights shining down on her in the 18th floor boardroom of Central Jet Airways headquarters. She could hardly hear the assistant behind her, still stammering out apologies. All she could see was that look, his eyes and May's eyes. 4 eyes locked in the glare of the room. Karen's, wide with fear, May's, sparkling with hope, and then those other eyes, a pair so cold, so stunned and confused that every crease seemed to vanish from the powerful man's face across from them. "Daddy," May said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No one moved, no one breathed, no one understood what was happening except Karen, and even she wasn't sure she did. Ethan Maddox, the CEO of Central Jet Airways, was the man she had met only once in her life. One single encounter, one summer 6 years ago, when she had been a conference assistant at an aviation summit in Dallas. They'd talked for one night. Nothing more, no phone numbers, no promises. She never thought he would even remember her. And yet, her daughter had just called him Daddy. Ethan rose from his chair, not fast, not slow, as if every centimeter of his movement was programmed by an AI that didn't allow a single emotion to slip through. "Miss Adams," he said, his voice deep and steady enough to make Karen shiver, "I believe you owe me an explanation." Karen swallowed hard. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed. Karen started, unsure how to phrase the impossible. "She's my daughter, May." He didn't look at May, just at her, as if every number on a financial spreadsheet was trying to calculate the shock in front of him. "And you thought bringing a child to an executive interview at a major airline was a professional decision? It was an unavoidable mistake. I didn't have childcare this morning. I didn't plan." Karen stopped mid-sentence, because May had walked up to the desk and climbed into Ethan's lap like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You're the man from the picture." May beamed. "Mommy has a wooden box with your photo in it, with a lady named Rebecca. She said you were an old friend, but I knew you were my dad." Ethan froze, then spoke barely above a whisper. "Rebecca?" Karen nodded. "She couldn't lie. My best friend. That night she introduced us in Dallas. I didn't think you'd remember." "Dallas, 2017. Silence. Then something strange happened. Ethan looked straight at May, and in his eyes Karen saw something she never expected. Not anger, not caution, but fear. Not fear of her. Not fear of responsibility, but fear that this little girl might actually be his daughter. The meeting didn't end as planned. May was taken to the lounge with another assistant, while Ethan asked Karen to stay. "We need to talk," he said. Not cold, but not gentle either. Karen nodded, clutching the worn leather bag she'd carried. She hadn't prepared for this. She never had. Ethan pulled out his phone. "I'll request a DNA test. Today." Karen exhaled sharply. "I didn't come here for money. I came for a job. I didn't know you were Ethan Maddox. I didn't even know you worked in aviation back then." He stared at her. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" "May doesn't know who you are," Karen said, her voice catching. "She just saw the photo and she saw something I never dared admit." Ethan sat back down, gently, as if the world had just shifted beneath him. Then let the truth decide. 3 hours later, Karen and May arrived at a private clinic in Midtown, arranged by Central Jet. A technician collected DNA samples from all three, Karen, May, and Ethan. No words were exchanged, only glances. Ethan didn't accompany them outside, but before stepping into his car, he turned to May, who was holding her mother's hand tightly, and asked softly, "Would you like some ice cream?" May hesitated, looking up at Karen. Karen nodded. And then, as if a new world had just opened, May grinned. "Yes, mint chocolate chip," Ethan smiled, just slightly. In the temporary hotel suite Ethan arranged for them that night, Karen couldn't sleep. She lay on the crisp white bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about being a single mother for the past 6 years. Working nights, clipping coupons, debating every new pair of shoes for her daughter. According to the Pew Research Center's 2021 data, 1 in 4 American children lives with a single parent, most often a woman of color or working-class background. Karen was one of millions, invisible, quiet, and resilient. But now her daughter, May, might be the child of one of the most powerful men in aviation. And Karen, a woman who was once just a name on a resume, now stood at a crossroads she never wanted, but could no longer avoid. Karen stood motionless in front of the glass door of the Human Resources office at Hamilton International Airport. From the hallway, she could see the silhouette of the man standing with his back to her, speaking to his assistant. He was tall, upright, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit. His dark hair was neatly combed, his leather shoes gleaming. The kind of man Karen never thought she'd have to face again, not after all these years. She tightened her grip on May's small hand. The little girl stood beside her, wearing a cat-shaped backpack, chattering excitedly about a spaceship drawing she had just finished coloring while they waited. Karen tried to keep her expression calm. She knew May had done nothing wrong, at least not intentionally. But it was that very innocence that had flung open a door Karen had locked away for 6 long years. "Miss Holt?" A female voice called from the reception desk. "Mr. Hale is ready to see you now." Karen nodded, gently brushing May's hair back before bending down to whisper, "Remember what Mommy said, okay? Sit still, keep coloring, no wandering." May nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am." Karen gave her a small smile. A part of her wished that door would never open. But fate doesn't ask for permission. Inside the office, Mason Hale, CEO of the Hamilton Airport Authority and one of the most influential figures in the U.S. commercial aviation industry, was reviewing candidate profiles with his usual sharp eye. But this time, his hand paused when he saw a familiar name. Karen Holt. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Subtle, but not missed by James, his personal assistant of nearly 10 years. "Is something wrong, sir?" James asked quietly. Mason shook his head slightly. "Just, the name sounds familiar." Karen stepped into the room. Her eyes met Mason's, and in that instant, 2 worlds collided. A long silence fell between them, thick and heavy like the air before a storm. Karen was the one to break it. "Hello, I'm Karen Holt. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today." Mason nodded, his voice measured. "Please have a seat." The interview began like any other. Mason asked about skills, experience. Karen responded with the composed professionalism of someone who had survived countless odd jobs just to raise a child. But both of them knew there was something else lingering in that room, something bigger, unspoken. "I see there's a 6-year gap on your resume," Mason noted, eyes locked on her. "Would you mind explaining that?" Karen pressed her lips together. This was the part she always had to brace for. "I became a single mother at a young age. My daughter needed me. I worked freelance, part-time, and with several community projects, but nothing full-time or permanent." Mason nodded, appearing empathetic, but his mind was already racing. There was something oddly familiar about that little girl. Meanwhile, outside, May had wandered from her coloring chair. Curious, she walked down the wide hallway and stopped in front of the large office window, where she could see her mother speaking with a man she didn't know. Suddenly her eyes lit up. "Mommy, look!" May shouted through the glass. "It's him." Everyone in the corridor turned. James rushed over to gently hold May's arm. "Sweetheart, you can't yell in here." But the office door had already opened, and Mason stepped out, only to have the little girl run straight to him and wrap her arms around his leg without a moment's hesitation. "Daddy, it's you." The hallway fell into a stunned silence. Karen froze. James stood like a statue. And Mason, the man who had no idea he might have a child, stood there, staring at the little girl hugging him as if they'd known each other forever. "What is going on?" Mason asked, his voice dropping, cold as steel. Karen lowered her head, reaching for her daughter's hand. "May, sweetheart, you're mistaken. Come here." But May looked up at Mason, her eyes bright with certainty. "You're the man in Mommy's photo box, the one with Auntie Bex." Each word struck like a needle into the past. Bex, Rebecca, Karen's best friend, and Mason's former lover, who had passed away after giving birth to May. A truth Karen had never dared to speak aloud. Mason stepped back, his breath short. "Rebecca Jensen?" Karen could no longer avoid it. Yes. The air in the office had turned heavy, as if every molecule of oxygen was weighed down by things left unsaid. Karen stood still, her hand tightly gripping May's, but the little girl just kept smiling up at Mason, blissfully unaware of the storm swirling among the adults. Mason knelt down, eyes fixed on May. "You're saying, this child," he stopped, voice rasping. "Rebecca was her mother?" Karen swallowed hard, feeling fragments of a buried past being unearthed piece by piece. She gave a quiet nod. Rebecca was May's biological mother. Silence. Only the sound of a coffee machine humming in the hallway and the ticking of a clock echoed steadily, counting down the tension. "Why didn't I know?" Mason asked, his voice hollow, drained of life. Karen gently pulled May closer. "Because she never told you, and I didn't know until it was too late." Mason turned away, bracing himself against the desk as if needing something solid to keep from collapsing. The composed exterior of a man who had run one of the busiest airport networks in the country was now crumbling under the weight of an unimaginable truth. In America, the concept of co-parenting, raising a child together despite no romantic relationship, is common. But for Mason, this wasn't a custody agreement or a parenting plan. It felt like a betrayal. A child, his flesh and blood, had existed for 6 years without his knowledge. He turned to face Karen again. "I need to know everything. Right now." They moved to a private conference room, where James took May down to the employee lounge, where a small children's reading area had been set up. Karen agreed reluctantly, still shaken. May, as always, was well behaved, unaware she had just unraveled the past her mother had tried so hard to keep sealed. Mason sat across from Karen, hands clasped together. "Start from the beginning." Karen took a deep breath. "I met Rebecca at the University of Michigan. We were roommates and then best friends for nearly a decade. I knew she once loved a man whose career was rising fast, but then she moved away. She didn't say much. By the time I found out she was pregnant, it was too late." Mason cut in. "Rebecca left after we broke up. I had been promoted to a regional executive role on the West Coast and had to relocate to San Francisco. She said she didn't want to follow me, that we were on different paths." Karen looked at him, her eyes saying what her lips didn't dare. "She left because of you. She said you were too ambitious, that you'd choose spreadsheets over a child." Mason said nothing. He'd heard that before, from friends, from partners. Now from the woman who had borne his child. Karen continued, her voice trembling. "Rebecca passed away right after giving birth to May. Cardiac complications. She left a letter, saying that if anything happened, I was the only one she trusted to raise her daughter." Mason closed his eyes. His chest tightened like something was being wrung from the inside out. "And you didn't know I was the father?" Karen nodded. "Rebecca only referred to you as M. She never mentioned your full name. The only clue was a photo, just one, of the two of you standing at JFK. She kept it in a small wooden box. And May found it? Last week. I hid it well. But she's smart. She asked who the man was. I told her he was an old friend of Auntie Bex. I never expected this morning." Her voice broke. Tears welled up. "I never intended to hide this forever, but I was too afraid to open that door." Mason sat frozen. His mind swirled with memories of Rebecca. Her quiet smile, the way she'd listened to classical music while working, the arguments they had about life's direction, and their final goodbye at JFK, where she walked away without a word. And now, their daughter was 6 years old and had just called him Daddy. "I want a DNA test," Mason said after a long pause. Karen nodded. "I understand. Not because I doubt it, but because I need certainty before I make any legal decisions." Karen looked up at him. What will you do if she really is your daughter? Mason met her eyes. Then I won't let her go another day growing up without me. Relevant statistic? According to the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are approximately 140,000 births annually in the U.S. where the father is unaware of the child's existence until later. Of those cases, nearly 22% result in legal disputes over custody or paternity. But cases resolved peacefully through mutual agreement, like the one Mason was now seeking, account for only around 8%. After agreeing to a private paternity test through a high-tier lab located right at the airport, a VIP service reserved for executives, Karen gathered her things and called May back to the room. The little girl ran in, as carefree as ever. "Are you my daddy for real?" May asked Mason, her green eyes sparkling like a precious gem. Mason knelt down, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We're about to find out, sweetheart." Outside the 18th floor window of Grantworth International Airport, the sky was blanketed with heavy gray clouds, as if foretelling a storm about to descend, not just a storm in the skies, but in the heart, in life. Inside the airport's internal medical office, where Mason discreetly coordinated a private medical team for executive-level, sensitive, and strictly confidential situations, Karen sat on a dark blue leather chair, clutching her bag tightly, eyes fixed on the lab room door. May was in the adjoining waiting room with a kind-hearted female nurse tasked with keeping her calm with Crayola crayons and soft cookies. But Karen knew this wasn't just a blood test, it was a test of the human heart. Mason stepped out from the back room holding a large yellow envelope. His eyes no longer held confusion. They were focused, resolved. Just like when he stood before the board to present an $800 million acquisition proposal, except this time the stakes weren't measured in dollars. He sat down, placing the envelope on the wooden table between them. Silence. "Want me to open it?" he asked. Karen nodded, though her whole body trembled. Mason opened the envelope. A single sheet of paper with a single line, printed in sharp black ink. Probability of paternity, 99.996%. No more doubt. No room for escape. May was his daughter, his flesh and blood. 1 second, 2, 3. Karen didn't speak. She lowered her head, covering her face with her hands as the tears spilled. Not from sadness, but from years of waiting. Years of carrying the dread that if May ever met her biological father, would he reject her? Turn his back? But Mason didn't turn away. He sat still and then softly said, "I've missed 6 years. I'm not missing another day." Cultural note. In the U.S., DNA testing for paternity is no longer uncommon. According to the American Association of Blood Banks, AABB, over 400,000 paternity-related DNA tests are conducted annually, most of them initiated for legal reasons like custody, financial support, or inheritance. However, cases like Mason's, where the results reshape an entire life trajectory, are rare. That afternoon, Mason canceled every meeting. He offered to take Karen and May to dinner at the airport's rooftop restaurant, a quiet spot reserved for senior staff and elite passengers. But Karen declined. "Not because I don't want to," she said, "but because I don't know how to face her yet. She's used to me being her whole world." "Then maybe," Mason replied, offering a small, reassuring smile. Her world just got bigger, with one more person to protect her. The next morning, at exactly 6:17 a.m., Karen's phone buzzed. Subject: Media Inquiry, Urgent. From Hannah Lopez, Social Features Editor, Skyline Weekly, a digital tabloid known for real-life exposés on the elite, airports, and high-profile scandals. Attached article headline: Who is the mystery child spotted with Grantworth CEO Mason Hale? Image: a blurry but clear enough photo of Karen holding May's hand as they entered Mason's office, taken by some anonymous journalist in the administrative concourse. Karen's face drained of color. She immediately called Mason. He picked up after 3 rings. "I know," Mason said, voice firm. "My PR team is on it. I'm also finding out who leaked the photo." "What do we do now?" Karen asked, her voice trembling. "Protect May first. Her safety comes before anything. Then we protect her privacy." "You're not going to lie to the press, are you?" "No, but I am going to tell the story. They won't write the script for us." The strategy. 3 hours later, Mason sent Karen a draft of the official press release from the Grantworth Airport Communications Office. "I have recently discovered that I have a 6-year-old daughter, something I was never informed of until this week. I am doing everything I can to support both the child and the woman who raised her. A strong, courageous mother who has never asked for anything but kindness for her daughter. We ask for privacy during this time and hope to move forward without harm to the child. Karen read it, and something stirred inside her. Not full trust yet, but the glimmer of a possible future where she wouldn't walk alone. That evening, Mason stopped by Karen's apartment, a small, modest home with windows facing the western runway, where the roar of jet engines was part of every dinner. May opened the door. "Hi, Daddy." No awkwardness, no hesitation, just wide eyes full of hope. Karen stood behind her, motionless. "Are you staying for dinner?" May asked. Mason smiled. "Only if your chef approves." May ran toward the kitchen, shouting, "Mommy, Daddy wants to eat with us." Monday, 8:46 a.m., Conference Room C, Executive Wing, Grant Worth International Airport. Mason Hale sat at the head of a long mahogany table, shoulders squared as if trying to contain the storm thundering in his mind. The expensive Cartier watch on his wrist seemed to tick faster than usual, or at least, to the board members in the room, he was late. Not in time, but in controlling the narrative. "I'll be blunt, Mason," came a deep voice from the left. It was Alton Rise, VP of External Affairs. "You've been on every major headline for the past 72 hours. We're preparing for the North American Aviation Summit next month, and meanwhile you found out I have a 6-year-old daughter." Mason cut in, voice cold. "I understand the impact on our image, but let's be clear, this is a family matter, not a financial scandal." "But it does affect the stock," Alton retorted. GIA Holdings shares dropped 3.2% since Friday. And let's not forget, we're in negotiations with Airlux for a new international partnership. Questions about leadership stability have already come up. Mason remained silent. Words like leadership and stability now felt like insults. No one asked how he felt learning he had a daughter. All they cared about was, how does this affect them? Elsewhere, 9:17 a.m., 22nd floor, Vanessa Lynn's penthouse. Vanessa, Mason's current girlfriend, entrepreneur and founder of aviation logistics app Flysoft, stood before the mirror, touching up her bold red lipstick. She had it all: confidence, Ivy League credentials, a network of angel investors, and a life with no room for children. She glanced at her phone. Mason? No response. Last seen 7:02 a.m. The media storm had made her trend in the worst way. Under the hashtag Mason Hale Daughter, people were resurfacing images of Vanessa attending a charity gala with Mason, now swarmed with comments. "She's gonna freak when she finds out Mason has a kid." "Vanessa's brand is child-free empowerment. This is gonna crash her next launch." Plot twist, she becomes stepmom. Vanessa locked her phone, removed her AirPod, and dialed. No answer. Her jaw clenched. Karen sat in the parent-teacher conference room across from Miss Riley, May's homeroom teacher, a woman in her 50s with soft brown hair and silver-rimmed glasses. "Karen," she said gently, "I completely understand your situation. May is a wonderful student, but since the media coverage, a few parents have started calling." Karen nodded, keeping her composure. "I know, our private life isn't private anymore. We won't let this affect May," Miss Riley assured her. "But you should prepare for the questions. Children these days, they sense everything." Karen took a deep breath. She knew. Last night May had asked, "Mommy, am I famous now? Someone took a picture of me at the airport." Karen hadn't known how to respond. Mason sat across from Karen at a table near the large glass window, looking out over the parked planes on the runway. No food was touched, just 2 glasses of water and a manila folder between them. "The board wants me to issue a second public statement," Mason said. "They want me to clearly separate my personal role and CEO role. Basically, yes, I'm May's father, but it won't affect my leadership of the airport." "Sounds more like damage control than a statement," Karen replied. Mason sighed. "You're not wrong." "And Vanessa?" Karen asked. "Does she know?" "She does," Mason said. "She texted me, 'Make a choice, me or this surprise family.'" Karen looked down at her glass. A part of her wanted Mason to choose his daughter. Another part felt sympathy for Vanessa. No one likes their life turned upside down by something they didn't choose, just like she once hadn't. A new strategy was forming. "We're going to frame Mason not as a man cornered by scandal, but as a human leader, one who steps up, admits the truth, and chooses love," said the PR strategist. A video outline was drafted. A scene of Mason reading a book with May. A scene of him in the airport's control center, soft light glowing. A close-up, direct to camera. As CEO, I'm responsible for millions of passengers each year. But as a father, I only need one passenger, my daughter May. May sat drawing in her room. Karen entered quietly and wrapped her arms around her from behind. You know, she began softly, your daddy, he's trying to learn how to be a real dad. May didn't look up. I know. He texted me today to ask who my favorite superhero is. Karen smiled. And what did you say? Captain Marvel, because she's strong and doesn't need anyone to protect her. Karen felt something loosen in her chest. Despite the storm still ahead, this little 6-year-old, with her crayons and childlike wisdom, was already teaching the adults how to walk through pain with grace. Wednesday, 8:12 a.m., to 18th floor, Executive Headquarters, Grantworth International Airport. Mason stood in front of the wide glass window, gazing down at the endless runways where one massive jet after another took off. He thought of May, the tiny girl whose life had just been stitched into the silk fabric of his own, and now every thread felt stretched thin. A knock sounded on the door. Come in, he said, not turning around. It was Eleanor Whitman, chairwoman of the board, a woman in her 60s with silver-white hair, known for her legendary persuasion skills and her ability to slash budgets without blinking. We need to talk, she began, straight to the point. Mason turned, his gaze sharp. Let me guess. May? She's an angel, Eleanor replied bluntly. But the media doesn't see her that way. In the past 3 days, over 18 articles from NYT, Vox, even Forbes, have reported on a CEO who unexpectedly discovers he has an illegitimate child. The hashtag #GateBaby is trending. Mason narrowed his eyes. Eleanor, I've complied with everything the PR team recommended. What more do you want? We want you to step back from your executive role for 3 months. Let the media frenzy settle. Step back? Mason's chest tightened. In the world of airport leadership, 3 months was a lifetime. And who's stepping in during that time? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Eleanor lifted her chin. Alton Rise. Mason scoffed. The same man who said, kids don't belong near corner offices? Perfect. Eleanor's expression didn't flinch. We're not asking you to resign. We're asking you to protect the company. And my daughter? Mason asked. Who protects her from the scorn being thrown at a child who's done nothing wrong? That question comes from a father, not a CEO. 10:03 a.m., Forest Hill Elementary, Teddy Bear's recess time. Karen sat quietly by the playground fence, eyes fixed on May playing alone in the far corner. The other kids were gathered around the slide, laughing, but no one invited May to join, not today. Not since the Morning Chronicle published an article calling her the illegitimate child of a high-profile CEO. A blonde girl named Emily approached, holding a popsicle. My mom says you don't have a real dad, Emily stated. No malice in her voice, just the brutal clarity of a child repeating what she'd heard. May looked up, eyes red. My dad's busy, but he's real. Emily shrugged. If your dad's real, why doesn't he pick you up like mine does? Karen rushed over. May, come here, sweetheart. She knelt, hugging her daughter tightly, feeling the small body tremble. It's okay, she whispered, Mommy's here. But inside, Karen knew. No amount of motherly love could stop the world from labeling her child. 2:16 p.m., Vanessa Lynn's penthouse. Vanessa stared at her phone. A video call from Mason blinked on the screen. She tapped accept. Mason, she began. No greeting, just ice. Vanessa, I know you're angry. I know you didn't sign up for this. I'm not angry. She cut him off. I'm furious. I'm disappointed. I'm scared. Mason frowned. Scared? I built my entire personal brand on being a free, childless woman. I've always been clear, I don't want to be a stepmom. And now I'm being branded as the cold CEO fiancé who rejected her fiancé's surprise child. You never asked me, Vanessa snapped. You made the decision to keep Karen and May in your life, and I was left on the outside. She held up an envelope to the camera. This is the Flysoft deal, $12 million from Seed Fund West Coast. You backed it, they're pulling out. Mason said nothing. Vanessa stared him down. Choose, me, them. 5:47 p.m., outdoor park near the airport residential complex. Mason walked briskly, April wind lashing his face like a warning. He had declined the 3-month leave. He hadn't answered Vanessa. But he knew, tomorrow, everything would hit at once. And there was still one person he owed the truth to. the one who had carried the weight of it all, Karen. He found her and May sitting on a stone bench beneath a large wing-shaped statue, the airport's iconic sculpture. May was asleep against her mother's shoulder, still smeared with paint from her art class. Karen looked up as he approached. "I thought you'd choose silence." "I almost did," Mason said. "But then I saw her on TV today, and I knew I couldn't walk away from her like that." "So what will you do?" Karen's voice trembled. "Be a real father? Or keep living in your world of stocks, boards, and smooth statements?" Mason sat down beside her, voice low. "Tomorrow, I'm holding a press conference. I'm going public. May is my daughter. Not an affair, not a scandal, a gift." Karen stared at him, skepticism softening. "And Vanessa? She gave me an ultimatum. But if someone loves me and can't accept my blood, then they're not the person meant to walk with me to the end." Karen said nothing. But she shifted slightly, just enough for Mason to wrap both of them in his arms. Mother and daughter, together. Camera flashes lit up in bursts. Behind the podium, the Grantworth Airways logo glowed in cool LED blue. Mason stood still. The microphone before him felt like a mirror, reflecting every decision he had ever made. White shirt, charcoal gray blazer, no tie, for the first time since 2014. A deliberate choice. "I'm going to speak as a human being," he thought, "not a title." The cameras zoomed in as he began. "My name is Mason Hale, CEO of Grantworth International, and also the father of a little girl named May." A wave of murmurs rippled across the room. Some reporters looked up from their laptops. A bold reveal, right at the start. "May is not a secret. She is a miracle I never knew I needed, until her life intersected with mine. And with her mother, Karen, who raised our daughter with unwavering love despite hardship, scrutiny, and my silence. A silence born not from choice, but ignorance." Mason paused, locking eyes with the press. "Some might say I'm doing this to salvage my image, to control the PR fallout. But the truth is, this is the first time in my life I understand what it means to lose something you never knew you had, and never want to lose again." He held up a printed photo from his phone. May grinning with her new backpack, standing in front of her school gate. We often define a great leader as someone who protects shareholder value, expands market reach, optimizes cost. But if a 6-year-old girl can't walk into class without fear of being photographed or whispered about, then no matter how many contracts I sign, I don't deserve to be a CEO, let alone a father. Then in a husky voice he closed. "If you ask me today, what is my greatest accomplishment? I won't say Terminal 4. I won't say the Pacific Sky joint venture. I'll say it's May. It's seeing her hold her mother's hand and forgive the man who once wasn't there." The room was silent. No applause. No laughter. Just a stillness, the kind that echoes deeper than any sound. Eleanor Whitman stood before the executive board, tapping her fountain pen gently against the table. "We have two choices," she said. "One, we keep Mason and embrace a more human, accessible leadership model. Or two, we appoint interim leadership and return to a classic brand image." Tom, a young CFO, hesitated. "I received over 700 emails this morning. 92% said they'd rather fly with an airline whose CEO has a heart." A strategic stakeholder flipped their iPad around. "Our stock is up 2.3% in just 3 hours. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Then I suppose the choice is clear." Karen hadn't touched her food. Before her sat a glass of water with melted ice. Across the table was Vanessa. No assistant, no entourage. Just two women who had once stood on opposite sides of the same boundary. "You win," Vanessa said quietly. Karen tilted her head. "I wasn't playing to win or lose." "Then you're lucky," Vanessa replied, her voice not sarcastic this time. "I thought I knew Mason, but when he walked onto that stage today, I didn't recognize him anymore." Karen said nothing. Vanessa gave a faint smile. "And May? She made me realize something I've never had the courage to admit." She stood, took an envelope from her bag, and placed it on the table. "This is my resignation from both the executive board and my media role at Grantworth. I submitted it this morning. He deserves a new beginning, without me in the way." Karen watched Vanessa leave. She didn't feel like she had won. She just felt lighter. May sat between Mason and Karen on a small couch, hugging a teddy bear dressed in a pilot uniform. The TV replayed the morning's press conference. "Look, Mommy, that's Daddy. He's talking about me." Mason gently squeezed his daughter's hand. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" he asked. "I think you were brave," May whispered. Like my real daddy. Karen leaned her head on Mason's shoulder. Now I believe someone can be a good CEO and a good father. Mason smiled, still learning. But lucky for me, I've got the two best teachers in the world. In a featured article in The Atlantic, Mason Hale was called the CEO of a new generation, a leader driven not by image or ego, but by empathy, humanity, and responsibility. Karen officially joined Grantworth as Director of Community Development, leading the Open Wings DRARF initiative, an employment program supporting single mothers in aviation careers. May transferred to a new school, where she proudly told her class, "My daddy's in the news, but more importantly, he walks me to school every morning." If you believe that one story can change how we see family, responsibility, and justice, hit subscribe to Aiva Stories today. At Aiva, we don't just tell stories. We challenge assumptions, we spark compassion, and we craft the endings that society too often denies to ordinary people. Subscribe now so you won't miss the stories that make you pause, breathe deeper, and find the courage to stand up. There are so many people like Karen out there, and you might be the next to see yourself in the story.